And that concludes the second day of the Parliamentary Ad Hoc Committee for 2026. Crime Intelligence boss Dumisani Khumalo, who's also the project leader of PKTT, has been testifying there before the committee that's probing allegations of infiltration in the criminal justice system. Just some of the points that the Crime Intelligence boss had touched on throughout the day. He spoke about how some of his initiatives to overhaul and professionalize crime intelligence were met with significant resistance from senior management as well as political influences. He spoke that he highlights that the division was operating in a free-for-all environment with outdated policies, misuse of resources. He speaks about nepotism in some of the appointments. The resistance also appears to have been a reaction to the efforts to institute legal compliance and accountability in some instances, especially when it comes to resource redistribution. He also underscored some of the necessities of implementing legal reforms within the Crime Intelligence Division, including the compliance of some of those regulations of interception when it comes to the communications of procurement. He criticized the directives such as the halting of appointments and the disbandment of specialized units such as the PKTT, which of course led to many of these proceedings now as we see them today. He also claims that these have hampered some of the operational capacity. His testimony has also suggested that the political interference within SAPS and administrative decisions have had a tangible negative effect on crime intelligence's ability to function optimally in the country. So he also went on, and I think for many, speaking about that analysis and investigation that has led to them finding that allegedly many of those SAPS members are a part of the cartels that exist within the country. Let's now cross to Zoleka Qodashe, who is my colleague, who is on the ground at this Parliamentary Ad Hoc Committee. Zoleka, very good evening to you. Certainly one that stood out from today's proceedings is that which the General is saying, that a majority of SAPS members, particularly those within the Gauteng area, are in some way allegedly a part of some cartels.
That's correct, Katlego. Good evening, and good evening to the viewers. That is the dominant theme that has emerged from the testimony of the head of crime intelligence and also the leader of the political killings task team, that is Dumisani Khumalo, really thrusting the spotlight, or thrusting the Gauteng SAPS in the spotlight in relation to those alleged links with drug cartels. And what he does is he places us on the 6th of December 2024. You'll remember that is the raid that took place on Qodashe Molefe's property, as well as, or rather that search on Qodashe Molefe's property, or that arrest on Qodashe Molefe's property, and the search that was conducted on the property of Vusimuzi Cat Matlala. Now, what is prominent there is that he says that is when his troubles, as well as the troubles of the political killings task team, started. He speaks of a Brigadier Ngwashu. Now, this particular brigadier is said to have requested the dockets that were handed over after that particular request or directive for the disbandment of the political killings task team. And the reason why that is important, Katlego, is because those dockets contained one that was also linked to Qodashe Molefe. You'll remember that Qodashe Molefe is accused of being one of the masterminds behind that particular arrest, or rather murder, of the Vereniging engineer Armin Swartz. And so that is why that is important. And in fact, it was a prosecutor in that case that had said that there are some elements, or rather officials within the SAPS, that were working with the members, or rather these drug cartels, and that is why that particular instance is important. There's also the mention of an official by the name of Pule Daun, who is also said to be one of the organizers behind that hit on the Val engineer. And that is when we are also told about Brigadier Shibiri, who essentially also worked to ensure that there were bribes that would be handed over to members within the criminal justice system to ensure that when Dawu appealed that particular bail decision that was not granted in his favor, that would then the appeal would be successful. And he confirmed, Dumisani Khumalo confirming before the ad hoc committee that indeed that particular appeal was successful. Let's just take a listen to what he says are these tentacles within the SAPS in Gauteng in relation to crime, or rather in relation to that criminal infiltration.
There is this, what is happening in Gauteng, where the highly trained combat members of SAPS are moonlighting for the cartels. In other words, working outside their working hours. It happened to the team, I think, on 2 occasions when they are moving with the combat teams from Gauteng. They get to a cartel member, and then the member will ask, hey, what are you doing here? Because you were with me last weekend working for me.
This is also significant, Katlego, because the head of crime intelligence also mentioned or testified before the inquisitorial body that Qodashe Molefe had already known before that particular search operation was conducted on his property that there would be an operation. In fact, he says that there were members of the Hawks on his property that had attempted to make it seem as if they were there for an operation when in fact there was no investigation that was being conducted by the Hawks, and instead they were there to monitor. And he says that essentially the members of the SAPS in Gauteng are essentially playing SOS for members of the drug cartels, and that is why that particular instance is significant. What is also significant is that he speaks about a coincidence, as he puts it, on the 6th of December 2024. That is the same day in which those operations on Qodashe Molefe's property, as well as that operation on the property of Vusimuzi Kat Matlala took place. And he says that there was an email on that same day from the head of the Investigating Directorate Against Corruption, IDAC, that is Advocate Andrea Johnson, essentially saying that she requested certain information from the officials that were conducting those operations in Gauteng in relation to those cases or an attempt to open a case against Dumisani Khumalo. You'll remember that the member of parliament for the NCC, that is Fadil Adams, had attempted to open several cases, first in the Western Cape, that's 3 cases in the Western Cape towards the end of October, and then another case and also several other cases in Gauteng just days later. And that is the information that Advocate Andrea Johnson sought from these detectives in Gauteng. Let's just take a listen to what Dumisani Khumalo had to say.
Another coincidence on the same day, on the 6th of December, at the time when these 2 operations were ongoing. This is the time Advocate Johnson sent a formal email to both Divisional Commissioner of Detectives as well as the Deputy Provincial Commissioner of Detectives in Gauteng, requesting access to the dockets that had been reported by the Member of Parliament, Mr. Fadil Adams, against me, the executive of crime intelligence, that is responsible for GCI Ops. The dockets were requested as a matter of agency on that day, the 6th of December, when the operation was on. That is attached then as Annexure SDK 13, that agent request of those dockets. Hence, then, as I said when I started the discussion under this paragraph, that The December, especially the 6th, was the beginning of the problems of PKTT and Khumalo.
Now, Katlego, another particular docket that is important that was opened in relation to Vusimuzi Matlala is that of the disappearance of Jerry Boshoga. You'll remember that that is the Pretoria businessman that has been missing since 2024. And in fact, when members of parliament descended upon the Qodashe Mampuru Correctional Facility last year to ask Vusimuzi Matlala a series of questions, he had said that Jerry Boshoga actually owed him a substantial amount of money and that had decreased and at the time was around 100,000 rand. And so since then, he has disappeared and members of parliament have been really inquiring about his whereabouts. And Vusimuzi Matlala actually apologizing to Jerry's mother or Boshoga's mother, saying that he had nothing to do with his disappearance. And so that particular matter was also important today because it was established or it was testified by Dumisani Khumalo that team that was investigating the disappearance of Jerry Boshoga was substituted. And that is a team that was appointed by the National Commissioner, Fani Masemola. That team was substituted when the now suspended Deputy National Police Commissioner for Crime Detection established a parallel team, his own team. And so that is why that particular instance was important. And so members of parliament really questioning Dumisani Khumalo on how this was allowed to happen. Let's take a listen.
I think you abdicated your responsibility with regards to this matter. You were supposed to intervene immediately after the dockets were taken from your team to another team. You were supposed to report the matter to the National Commissioner immediately and make constant follow-ups because you were appointed by the National Commissioner. You were not appointed by the Deputy National Commissioner, Sibia. So my view, General, is that you have allowed Sibia to run the show alone. You have allowed Sibia to run the show alone. And if it was not for the bravery of General Mkhwanazi, which he displayed on the 6th of July, today we will be faced with an elephant called Sibia in SAPS doing all sorts of shenanigans that you are alleging that he was doing. Do you agree with me when I say that you faltered? I mean, you committed a mistake by not intervening immediately on this matter.
I took note and agree, Honorable Member.
Now, Katlego, Dumisani Khumalo will continue facing questions as members of parliament now have their chance to really get clarity and extract as much information from him in relation particularly to certain investigations. So he's dropped a number of names already, and in terms of other investigations, he may not be able to divulge because of the sensitivity of those particular investigations. But we expect that members of parliament will continue trying to get as much information from Dumisani Khumalo in relation to those allegations that were made by Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi on the 6th of July 2025 of criminal infiltration and political interference in the criminal justice system. For Newzroom Afrika on Channel 405, I'm Zoleka Qodashe in Cape Town.
All right, Zoleka Qodashe, thank you so much for bringing us that comprehensive analysis. Now,